Are here. Okay.
Woo!
Yes, we should be live. What is up? Let me just double check. I'm in the waiting thing. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Just saw the
Yeah.
Providence Singers do the Handel's Messiah last night. It was amazing. Whole new arrangement and everything. They've been doing that for the past 13 years, and I'm just damn proud of them. You know, they sound really good. Oh my gosh.
Nice.
How about you? How have you been? Been a minute
Good.
since our last talk.
Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah, so for those watching right now, for those that don't know, Mystic Muttering, his link is in the description, his channel. And we had a conversation over on his channel first. And in that conversation, we're like, we got to talk on my channel too, of course.
Yeah.
It was a great conversation. And I've been good. I've been basically making a lot of Christmas videos, a whole lot of Christmas videos.
I've been waiting for the walkout to be over to be able to check those out.
And a lot of Twitch streams talking about Christmas, and a lot of wearing of this epic hat here. For those.
That's awesome.
Wait,
that's awesome. Oh yeah.
Look at this. Look at I could shape it however I want.
Oh, there's wire in there.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Old stage guy. I know all the tricks.
Well, the tricks anyway. I was so surprised. It was for $5, and everybody every time they come on my stream on Twitch, they compliment the hat. It's great.
It's beautiful. And I think next you should do a little corkscrew action.
Yeah. Yeah, you could there's so many possibilities here.
Absolutely.
But the
a little Dr. Seussy with it.
Yeah, somebody said that in my comments. They're like, I just want to let you know your hat looks way too extra. You look like a damn Dr. Seuss character. And then they're like, and I fully support it.
Yes. Oh.
So yeah.
It's nice when you've got people around who appreciate it when you go overboard.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so your channel, Mystic Muttering. By the way, where did the name Mystic Muttering come from?
Actually, it came from an incident about this time of year back at college. I went to Hampshire College. Big shout out to all my Hampshire College friends. Camp Hamp forever. And I was asked to do, some kind of spoken word thing, and I had no idea what to call it. It was a big holiday party, like before we all went off for Christmas break and everything. And I just called it Mystic Muttering just to cover all my bases. And yeah, that's mostly it, really. I cover some politics. I try to do a mix of. I try to do politics from a very centrist angle. I'm an anarchist myself, but I believe we need to listen to the Othcoms too. But in all fairness, I think that there's something to be said for imagining new worlds and putting those stories out there, and that's part of what my channel's for, and it's also for showing how neo-paganism can fit together with libertarian communism in a really cool way. And it's been a real trip being a part of this whole bread tube thing. And like, for example, the walkout really tested my resolve there, but it's great to be back in the saddle.
Yeah. Oh, hold on.
And anybody who doesn't know about the walkout, there's a whole bunch of coverage, but basically YouTube is shutting people down without any warning, and so there was a bunch of creators who walked out just to demonstrate that we're not going to take it. And there's a lot of discussions right now about how that's going to go forward, and I certainly I want to be supportive. But let me tell you, YouTube has become a part of my life, Oh gosh, big motivator. I gotta get this done so I can watch this latest Damon Garcia thing. Or
Yeah, I was on Twitch talking to a lot of people during the walkout, and everyone was realizing how addicted they are to YouTube by not being able to go on YouTube for 3 days. And it was a lot of people even like, I keep noticing that I keep clicking it, and then I have to close out. What's up, young Simba? Yeah. What's up, Curses and Prayers? Good to see y'all here. And Geraldkin, thanks for being here. And but it's great because, and what's funny about that too, I kept the way people were talking about their realizations of how deeply addicted they are to YouTube reminded me of religious fasting language, where people say, "Oh yeah, I didn't realize like how much I really was controlled by this thing until I had to give it up for some sort of religious reason." And to me, like, that really should be what fasting even is about in a religious sense. It shouldn't be just something to make you feel guilty or something to get you to go to church more, but something that makes you realize what is actually controlling you and how you need to prioritize things to get back into control of your life.
Oh yeah. No, I feel that very, very much myself. I used to put great effort into reclaiming my Jewish heritage. And one of the things I would do is on Yom Kippur, this big day of fasting, I would go take a hike. And the worst part of the hike was always going by this shop called Atkins, which made cider donuts. And of course, Yom Kippur takes place right in the middle of the fall generally. And so they were going like gangbusters frying up those cider donuts. And they were... it was the first thing I encountered going out on the hike, and it was the last thing I saw coming back. And I would be like, I can gut it out for 10 more minutes to get to the fast breaking ceremony. Come on, we can do this. Yeah. And it's interesting. There's a lot of self-imposed discipline also on the right wing, and it's really interesting to see how they use that to create a sort of weird solidarity. Of course, they've got their reasoning very, very twisted, but all last month everybody was making fun of them, and I'm sitting there going, they're bonding over it. My God.
There's a healthy abstinence that, like I said, can teach us how to be more in control of our lives. And then there's the other type of abstinence, like that of the right wing, that is just to put you under further control. Like, we just wanted to have you even more control. And
it's a transference of control rather than a release.
Exactly. Yeah. It's sad. So it's like, the right wing shouldn't own abstinence or fasting or all that, and
or celebration for that matter,
or celebration as well. Yeah, exactly. Or celebration. And what's up, Dorian Sapiens? Good to see you here. And actually, I wanted to ask too, for those that don't know you, I wanted to hold on. Geraldkin said, came over to Damon's channel, let me know someone launched the Institute for Christian Socialism, but I can't link it. I saw the Magnificast is a Christian leftist podcast. I saw them link it earlier. So, but I didn't click on it. So I'll go back to their Twitter later and click on it because they were excited about it too. But
that sounds cool as hell.
Yeah, it does. But so I wanted
you'll forgive the term.
I know that's a very contradictory term.
True.
I want people to know your background with religion and spirituality and how you came to the way you practice it now. So can you tell us that?
Oh, certainly. Well, as I said, I come from a mixed family, mixed background of Catholic and Jewish extraction, and both of my parents were sort of lapsed in the religion that they grew up in, didn't really have much need for it. And, we celebrated the major holidays, Christmas, what have you, Passover and so on. But we didn't really go to religious services. So that was a mystery for me for a long time, just what people were doing Saturday and Sunday mornings. And, so I got really into it as a teen and just trying to reclaim a lot of that stuff. Got first exposed to paganism and went back and forth on it for a long time. And I discovered things like Thelema and the original Order of the Golden Dawn, which had a lot of Kabbalistic influence. So I started, even though I was still counting myself as Jewish, I was, reading about Kabbalah and the the Hermetic tradition of Kabbalah, which basically took the Greek gods and smacked them onto the Jewish tree of life and said, "Hey, look at these weird similarities." And so yeah, after a long time of struggle, the Celtic gods and the Greek gods and various individual renegades from other pantheons have been too active in my life for me to ignore. Basically, it's and now my practice is very grounded in animism, seeing a spirit in everything, from the pantheistic traditions in Kabbalism and what have you. So mostly what my practice looks like is daily food and drink sacrifices, regular incense sacrifices, big services on the big days, the cross-quarter days and what have you, as well as just, little things like, if somebody's stranded on the side of the road, oh, blessings of Hermes, etc. And yeah, it's and I've found some very interesting links between these philosophies and leftism, and fused them into what I like to call social ecology. Well, not social ecology, sorry, social animism. Social ecology is Murray Bookchin, who you should totally Google, by the way. But social animism is taking basically social ecology and recognizing not just the worldly power of work, but also the spiritual essence of work as well. And and therefore, you meet somebody's needs and you give them freedom, in effect. And that freedom is both material and spiritual.
Yes, both, fully both. Yeah, I've been talking to people about that too. Like when, find myself having conversations with atheists, which is, and from the position of trying to convince them that Christianity can be cool, and which is a very unfamiliar position for me, because I spent years in evangelical environments or conservative Christian environments where I was the one trying to convince my fellow Christians of the harms of Christianity so that they can adopt a more healthy, liberative version of Christianity. And so now I'm outside of that and in positions where I have to be like, well, it's not all bad. Like there's some good parts. So I'm not used to that. It's unfamiliar for me. But one of the things I keep coming back to is this idea of it's both. It's both the spiritual and material. We're not excluding the material for the spiritual, and we shouldn't exclude the spiritual for the material. It's fully both. Yeah,
absolutely. It's a lot like those folks who want us to call them comrade, but don't want to talk about social issues. They just want to talk about economics. And I've never met an economic issue that wasn't social. I've never met a social issue that wasn't economic. And in the same way, I've not met somebody who was completely. I've not met somebody completely material or completely spiritual. Sorry, I lost the thread for 2 seconds there.
It's all good. Yeah, I totally feel that. And I was also wondering, in your experience, was there local IRL communities that helped you in discovering your faith and neo-paganism and all that?
Yes, I can definitely say that. Hampshire College, when I was going there, had a wonderful and has a wonderful interfaith community there. The spiritual life department is excellent. And I want to especially point out my friend Chiron, who is now running a service called Impact Shamanism in New York. He's an amazing guy, amazing root worker. He's got an amazing melange of traditions that and a deep understanding of Christianity as well, as his background in root work is very Christian, as well as as deeply pagan. He's a really cool guy, and you can get in touch with him for workings if that's the sort of thing you're into. Other groups have been very helpful as well. There's a wonderful group out in Amherst, Mass. that did some work, that did some rituals, public rituals, when I was living out that way. I'm not sure if they're still going, but the online communities as well, various groups like the Internet Sacred Text Archive wouldn't be able to look things up quite as easily without them. Anybody who wants source material on anything, Christian, Jewish, all sorts of pagan, way too many sorts of ritual magic, New Age, anything, even stuff like Edgar Cayce the Psychic or UFOs. They've got all sorts of stuff on there. I've spent years of my life going through it at this point. Everything from the Gospel of Thomas to the works of Edgar Cayce and Aleister Crowley and all this. So yeah,
awesome.
It's been an interesting hike through the spiritual jungle for both of us, and it's interesting to me about what you said about how you found about where you found the open ears for your message. I always found that interesting. That it was that it's. Would you say it's a bit easier to show atheists that hashtag not all Christians are like the kinds that Dawkins and company like to laugh at than it is to say that to a certain style of Christian, a certain flavor of Christian, hey, there's some problems here.
Perhaps. I think I'm seeing everyone within every tradition seems to go through these stages of necessary maturing and developments where we begin by constructing our narrative, and our parents help us a lot with that, and our beliefs and the way we see the world. And then we get older and we start questioning and learning, and we go through a deconstruction and start questioning everything we've been taught and learn more. And that helps us to be able to see other perspectives that help us further question. But then there's a reconstruction that needs to happen after that, where you say, okay, now I know what I don't believe. I know how some of the stuff I came to believe actually has its origin within historical events, and it wasn't always like this. And so now what do I choose to believe now? What do I construct now with a healthy knowledge and skepticism? Or like with Marcus Borg talks about even the way we approach the Bible, how we start with reading it through a lens of naivety and then a lens of criticism. And then once you understand the way that the Bible was written, a post-critical naivety so you can read the stories and look for the meaning instead of trying to figure out if it really happened or not. And so I see that everyone has gone through something like that. And even atheists. So it's like I've talked to atheists who tell me, oh yeah, I remember my super cringy, edgy atheist phase where I was just constantly arguing with people. I was so annoying. But I know Christians who say something similar about oh, I remember my fundamentalist Christian phase where I was so annoying and always arguing with people. And so it's I'm realizing I'm able to talk to anybody, no matter where they're coming from, no matter what they believe, no matter their worldview, if we are coming at it from further along in the journey, where we're able to have a better understanding that I don't know everything. I'm not saying I have the absolute truth. I'm learning, I'm growing. Sometimes I doubt what I believe. Now let's talk about our perspectives. And it's so much simpler that way.
I like that a lot. Yeah. Can I make a terrible admission?
Yeah.
I had a cringy Wiccan phase. It's true. I went to teenwitch.com and the whole bit,
I never heard of that. What is that?
Oh, it was a site associated, I think, with Wikivvox, which was this Wiccan newspaper, partly online. It was, to be frank, it was a lot of fluffy bunny magic, but like you said, the first time you go through it, you go through it with a certain naivety. And I read a lot of articles on there that that pushed me to deeper things. And then you start reading, you might start out reading something that's written last week by somebody who wears too much silver jewelry and has a wacky name that they made up last month. But through the process, you start, if you have a curious mind and you want to know where things came from, you look for the sources and you look for their sources, and suddenly you're reading you're reading Paracelsus, or you're reading the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, or any of these really, really old stuff. And and again, there's certain tropes that the epic clapbacks about somebody in class says, "Oh my God," and you say, "Which one?" and you just snicker to yourself. And or the urge to give sassy clapbacks when people come knocking at the door asking about Jesus. I made a few of those in my time, but most recently somebody came around after a gig. I just played a farmer's market, and my buddy Sam was right here, sitting right here on the couch, and this couple of folks came to the door, asking if I wanted to talk for a second. And I said, all right. And they said, well, people are asking if the recent string of hurricanes was sent by God. And I said, listen, I'm very familiar with the Bible, and I appreciate you coming to read to me, but I've already got a path, and I appreciate it, and thank you anyway. And I sat down and wondered why I had done it. At first, I thought I was just showing off for my friend Sam, but trying to be extra good, for the good boy points.
Mm-hmm.
But then I thought, I wasn't thinking of them in the way that I had thought of door knockers during my cringy phase. My other cringy phase, I should say. Look at these, right? That's pretty cringy. Whatever. Cringe culture's dead. Anyway, yeah, I think it was what you said in that time between being a teenage Wiccan and now. I've had enough experiences where you don't go door to door without having some real conviction and being ready to face down a legion of assholes in the name of your God. And it all came down to me was, do I really want to be one of those legion of assholes? Do I want to be Private Mystic in the asshole army? And the answer is no.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny how perhaps one of the biggest things that just helps us overcome that stage is simply empathy. And it's in that edgy, cringy phase, it seems like a big part of that mindset is trying way too hard to get everyone to think exactly like you. And then you get to the point where you realize, oh, that's impossible. Maybe I should start considering how other people feel and think. And I'm saying too, it's just a necessary stage of maturing and growing and developing.
Well, one of can I recount one of the texts that really helped?
Yeah,
because a friend of mine thrust it into my hand after I'd been left by a really wonderful person who thankfully we're still friends, but that's another story. He gave me his copy. He lent me his copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Now, this was the work of a pagan emperor of Rome from way back when. There's actually a statue of him a few blocks from me. And he was writing this stuff. It was basically life advice on a battlefield. He was cleaning up a war that he didn't start and dying of something gastrointestinal and lingering. And, you know, and I'm gonna tell you what school of thought he contributed to, and you're gonna have a picture in your head, and it's gonna be very inaccurate. He was a Stoic, but that doesn't mean he was just standing out in the rain, letting it trickle down his face. You know,
Yeah.
he was he was a very interesting writer. And chapter 2 begins with this wonderful bit where he's talking about when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, I'm going to meet these ungrateful people. I'm going to meet unhelpful, rude, weird, and disagreeable people of every description. But I have no quarrel with them. We're all of the same humanity, and humanity was made to work together like the upper and bottom rows of teeth. I have no quarrel with anybody, really. And that really cracked my head open in a wonderful way.
Mm-hmm.
And I recommend, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations to anybody who's looking for, a bit of direction that doesn't give you. So the Stoic thing about the gods is, if they're real, we should honor them, and if not, then religion doesn't do much harm, and it actually helps you cultivate certain virtues like we were talking about before, etc., etc. But I don't want to misrepresent his thought too much. He puts it into very considerate terms, and the whole first chapter is just him thanking everybody ever taught him anything. From my father I learned this, from my grandfather I learned this, from my teachers I learned this, etc., etc. And it's I think it recognizes to a certain extent that you're not in this alone.
Mm-hmm.
And that as part of nature, we're part of these systems, and that people are social critters. And I guess it all got through to some extent. It's hard to remind oneself of Meditations chapter 2 some days.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one thing that I go back to continually when, especially when there's when I have to sit down and think, well, why did I do that?
Yeah, haven't we all? Definitely. And this whole stream, the reason this is happening is because it's the holiday season, the Christmas season, and the Yule season, the solstice season, all of it, all together. And I was thinking, it's funny, like this season at times can be a cause for a lot of resentment between Christians and pagans, where pagans have fully the right to be angry at Christians and say, you stole a lot of this from us. You co-opted the time of the year from us. You stole a lot of traditions from us. And Christians at times can be in a weird, exclusive bitterness and stinginess, and feel like, no, we didn't take anything. This was always ours, and that we created everything all on our own. And this is purely from the Bible, taught us how to have Christmas trees and put gifts under that. Jesus taught his disciples that, or stuff like that. And it's like when in reality, because especially particularly through the solstice season, our traditions have intertwined. This should be a season where we celebrate one another and we talk about, like, the similarities we have, but also the beautiful differences as well.
Absolutely. So, yeah. I think before I got entangled in making myself supper, I was really considering just going out into the back and building a fire, just to have myself a against the bonfire and everything. Very, very pagan-y. But I think that, there's an element of that petulant, sort of cringy Wiccan aspect of it, that teen witch aspect of it. And I can cop to this. I got a lot of pleasure as a teen about, by pushing my glasses up my nose and saying, well, actually... but now, now that I've read my Marcus Aurelius, and
Yeah.
it's harder to do that.
Yeah.
Harder to justify it anyhow. And one thing that I would recommend to anybody, Christian or pagan, to read about this time of year is Barbara Ehrenreich's Dancing in the Streets. It's a history of collective joy in the West, because she noticed how things like European Carnival and Christmas celebrations with all the drumming and dancing and begging for booze from door to door and all this stuff, it was a lot like the stuff that European explorers were finding in other parts and saying, "Oh my goodness, what savagery, Oh, tally-ho, my goodness. What are they getting up to now?"
Yeah.
And a lot of it, interestingly enough, was the same celebrations that Sigmund Freud's original patients were sort of looking out the window at. Because while the Borgias gave it up and sort of went into their own private world for drawing room Christmas parties and drawing room, Carnival celebrations, the lower classes, and especially the children later on, but the lower classes were still partying really, really hard. And, so this book details how that happened and how this process of, how collective joy was suppressed at first by the Romans, by the pagan Romans, then later by the early church as a way to gain respectability. Paul's letters to the Corinthians factor into it as well. And then you have the medieval church kind of making peace with it and, using it as a way of bringing people in. And oh my gosh, I could talk for hours about this book alone. But Christmas has always been a time of, really rowdy celebrations and also outright rebellion. And that's something that, it's kind of been lost as things have gotten, I guess, a lot more family friendly, certainly. And also just less and less rowdy generally.
Yeah. There's that rowdiness within all the winter celebrations that also with Saturnalia too, and role reversal, and how servants were able to speak up against their masters, and everyone would dress the same, and it was like, instead of seeing the difference in dresses because of class differences, and there was and just absolute partying and rowdiness, and Christmas as well. Like initially it was just like, this is a time where we feast and drink, and even like there is, I think everyone can relate, an experience of equality that you feel deep within in the midst of partying and rowdiness and dancing and eating and drinking together, where it's like we are all fully deep within this moment together, and I could see like we were all the same, and it's really powerful and so necessary. And I think too, like all celebrations should be that, like the holy days, holy day. The word holy in the Hebrew is the word kadosh, which means to set apart. Like holy days and holy spaces are spaces and days that are separated, set apart from the rest. And we need that holy distinction in order to gain a depth of life. Like we're setting this day apart to participate in this celebration, apart from the normal hustle and bustle of everyday life. And that is so needed as humans, because we're constantly changing and our world is constantly changing throughout the seasons, and nothing stays exactly the same in our body, and nothing stays exactly the same throughout the year. And yet in our capitalist system, work every day, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, or exact amount of hours, there's this overwhelming feeling of just sameness, same thing every day, all day, every day, all day, go to work, come home, watch TV, go to sleep. And that to me is like, shows how even more separated we've gotten from our communal celebration of holy days, and how desperately needed our communal celebration of holy days that we really need now.
Yeah. No, there's the other, as a pagan, I see it a lot in that sort of flattening, if you like. I see it in the way that seasonal differences become not something that you're out in all day, but just, another thing to think about when you're getting ready for, getting to work. It's another set of obstacles. Oh, how am I gonna dress so that I don't sweat all day at the office, or how am I gonna layer up so that I can stay warm on the way to work, and and still look professional, and you're not as connected with the life around you, and by extension, not as connected with the life within you.
Mm-hmm.
It's but yeah, I think there's something critical about it, and I love the trend of things like Friendsgivings and all these little celebrations that people are making, especially among folks who might not have a terribly welcoming place to go to this time of year. We can laugh at things like Seinfeld's Festivus or whatever, but if an invented holiday is what it takes, then go for it. In some of the latter chapters, Ehrenreich talks about how sports games have become carnivalized. They've become these opportunities for masking and face painting and dancing and, doing wild things that you wouldn't do at the office. And there's something about that we can all stand to embrace, and it can improve all of our lives greatly.
And it's like, if we try to get rid of it, like how we've completely separated from a lot of our pagan roots, it'll still come out in a different way.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I wanted to say too, it's like I very much value the different pagan traditions because of their embrace of the earth-based, natural earth-based religions. And because, first of all, when you talk about natural earth-based religions, you realize we're talking about something completely different than the new atheists who try to make it seem like all religious people believe in nonsense because they believe in all kinds of weird, supernatural, otherworldly things. And the pagans are over there like, I'm just talking about that tree over there, the grass here, the sky there. I'm not talking about some other beings in some other dimension. What are you talking about? I don't believe in that. And so first off, that exposes us, oh yeah, this whole spirituality and religion thing is so much deeper than we try to make it seem. And I very much value that, and feel like the beginning of Christianity, there was a bit of that within it, but it has continuously gotten more and more divorced from the earth. And I think it's because as Christianity has gone on, it's become more and more and more, and a very, perhaps rooted in competitiveness, it's become more and more about having the correct beliefs and doctrines. And that has made it tear itself apart from the earth more and more and more. And natural earth-based religions have a deep and beautiful poetic framing of a participatory, interdependent universe. And it's framed, and then Christianity has framed our mission as getting all the right beliefs in an independent, sovereign God somewhere else correct, and then to just spend the rest of our lives believing all these correct descriptions about God in order to be accepted by this God. But with that, there's literally nothing for us to do on this earth except to wait around believing all the right things. And so and then the earth-based religions, it's about, there's something for you to do, there's something for you to participate in this interdependent universe. And I see, that was a bit in early Christianity and sprinkled a bit through some blips within Christian history, but it's been largely lost. I'm interested in your thoughts on those differences as well.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of Jesus metaphor from what I remember of the scripture. You know, it's a lot of uh, there's a lot of um, looking for the pastoral metaphors. So
Mm-hmm.
things that herdsmen and fishermen would have been familiar with, things that people would have, had their things that people would have depended on for their livelihood and observed every single day. And it's it's a beautiful thing. The the pagan traditions are rooted in these what are essentially indigenous traditions of various parts of the world, and it's it's first of all interesting to try to do them outside of their natural outside of where they evolved in the first place, because I don't have an olive tree outside my house,
Mm-hmm.
you know to pour out libations to Athena, for example, or um, but also, yeah, I think the pagans have come back in a large part because that connection to the earth was something that people wanted, and it was something that they weren't getting elsewhere. And there are a lot of pagans who consider Jesus of Nazareth as an avatar of some kind, or they work him in because his wisdom is extremely valuable to them. And even among non-pagans, people who Christians who practice magic will draw their power from him. And it's really interesting to me because other Christians, you tell them that what faith healers or Christian root doctors do is magic, and they walk away hissing.
Yeah. But it's actually there. It's
It
all
is,
there.
absolutely.
And
The
like I said, it comes out like with the football thing. It comes out even if you try to get rid of it, it's going to come out in some other way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that, and again, the return of the repressed is used in right wing circles to justify all kinds of evil bullshit, all sorts of evil belief systems. But I see nothing essential about you know about hating somebody based on where their family's from, or I see nothing about that in the Emerald Tablet. I see nothing about that in the various writings that I draw from, and even if I did see it, I would know it to be bullshit,
Mm-hmm.
and I would be able to say, actually, yes, ancient author, I do know better than you. It's not about submitting to some ancient author. It's about wrestling with that text, and I think that's something from the Jewish tradition that I carry on with. There's a story that Jacob wrestled with God,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's a tradition of sitting down with texts that give you trouble and wrestling with them, as it were. And there's a lot of that to do, whatever your tradition is, and it's interesting. I was thinking about how hard it is because we've put so much we've put so much on a pedestal for so long. It's really hard to compare anything objectively.
Yeah.
And the people who claim objectivity and don't give you any damn good reason, they're most often the ones who are pulling your leg. They're trying to get one over on you, in my opinion. Excuse me.
Yeah. I'm gonna say too, like, and I already knew I wanted to bring this up about the how it'll come out in other ways, and how the parts that of paganism or of polytheism that Christianity and other monotheistic religions have tried to completely distinguish itself from. It ends up coming up in different ways. Like I was thinking for like a couple months now, or a month probably, I have like this theory I've been thinking about where, and probably other people have articulated this before too, but I just haven't found them. But I was thinking about the differences between how it feels to walk into these different Christian churches, of how you have the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, which it was just one church, and then they split in around 1050 something between the Eastern Church and Western Church. So it's Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic. And then the 1500s was the Protestant Reformation, protestant against the Catholic Church. But then they kept protesting each other to where we have like now over 40,000 Protestant denominations. And so I was thinking like, when the difference between so you walk into a Catholic church and you see all this religious art and symbols and saints and candles and the Virgin Mary and all this stuff. And then you walk into a mainline Protestant church and it's similar, and both, except a little bit less art, a little bit less emphasis on symbolism, a lot less emphasis on Virgin Mary, a lot less emphasis on saints. And also both mainline Catholic churches are usually shaped like a church. No other building is shaped like that. And then you get to walking into an evangelical church, and there's either almost none or no art anywhere. It's like the walls are blank, and if there is art, none of it is old. It's all new, and only like one symbol, and it's the empty cross on the front of the stage, and there is nothing, no mention of Mary, no mention of saints, none of that. And so I was thinking about it first of like just from an art history perspective, and like I was feeling like perhaps the longer that a church sticks around, the more art that it has. The newer the church is, the less art that it has. And I think it's because each time there's been a schism, it started with this new group scrapping everything and saying, we're going to start from scratch, and all we have is our faith in Jesus, and we'll build up from there. And so they get rid of anything that reminds them of the old group that they were a part of. And so that's what original mainline Protestants did. And like I'm talking like Lutherans, Episcopalians, Methodists, people like that. That's initially what they did. But now since they've stuck around, this more mystical, magical stuff has snuck in. And that's why the evangelical churches, who are even newer, which is maybe like the oldest evangelicals are maybe 200 years at most, and at least like just a couple decades old. And so I've seen, and so that's why there's like barely anything in the newer the denomination, the less art there is. And you could even say the less magic there is. And I see that same thing goes for theology as well, to where the initial Christians, in an attempt to distinguish themselves from pagans, very much was just bare bones theology. We follow Jesus. And then as they stuck around, they ended up having an honor of Virgin Mary, because you can't omit the divine feminine for long. If you keep going, eventually the divine feminine is going to sneak in. And then as for like a pantheon of gods, eventually that snuck back in through the saints. Yep. And so it's like eventually this stuff comes in the longer you stick around, and the newer the denomination, the less you have. But if it sticks around, it'll come back. And but yeah, so that's like the thing I've been thinking a lot about lately. And there's like a couple there's this pagan guy in my Twitch stream recently who was saying that he's a pagan, but he goes to a Christian church, but he feels like he's just a Christian who's just honest about the pagan elements that are in Christianity and doesn't try to deny it. And when I feel like most Christians, it's there, but they just deny it.
Yeah. And it's easy to see why when you read some of the stuff. There was a wonderful program that I watched. I forget which streaming service has it, but it's called Rococo After Dark, talking about the sort of late Baroque art style. where you got, golden cherubs on everything, and everything's flowers and ferns, and just way over the top. And that was apparently the Catholic Church's artistic and aesthetic response to Protestantism. Basically, so you had the old school Catholic Church, you had the Protestant Reformations coming in, holy wars across Europe, and then you had the Counter-Reformation, which is like, okay, we've got competition now, we need to up our game, let's hire just all the artists and all the architects. And so it became a way of giving religious pilgrims going to these various holy sites more for their money, as it were, and giving them an aesthetic experience that would sort of help along a spiritual experience. And I think that, the Christianity as a whole is kind of split on that. Do you want that big aesthetic punch in the face to really get people in the mood, or do you want to only think about Jesus? And it's interesting to think about all these different churches, and all being centered on the same text, the same story, but approaching it in all these different ways. And I can't help but think there must be a need. There must be a need for these. I live in New England, so it's all like it's all old school congregational churches out here. Although one of the most beautiful churches in Providence is also the Christian Scientists. So there you go. My friend Daniel actually gave me a really interesting image. He's from New Zealand, so he's got some experience with the Anglican Church, the Anglican Communion, and he imagined an alternate universe where England, never fully Christianized, but you had these, the same, little ministers with their stooped shoulders, and next week everyone's coming for the bake sale and the ox sacrifice. Thank you very much to the widow Prundale for the generous donation of Benny the ox. Yes, we're going to be sacrificing him to Odin at 4 o'clock sharp, followed by tea and scones. Are there any further announcements? Basically asserting that that if paganism had lasted, it would have become as dry and tweedy as Anglican Christianity. And he does it way better, of course, but I always thought that was funny, and I feel like paganism has kind of dodged a bullet there, to be frank with you.
By never getting into big places of power or being the hegemony,
but
well, I mean, yeah,
and not giving itself the chance to get boring, at least not for us. I'm sure for many Romans, it was just, okay, splash the household.
yeah.
It's not. Yeah, that's what I want to tell people. If you're getting into paganism because you think that it's going to automatically make you this zealous, faithful, person that it's going to spice up your life forevermore. Sorry, no, there's no guarantee. But you could possibly, if you fall in with the right people and you make the right effort, I think it's entirely possible to have an aesthetic experience equal to that of an amazing Roman Catholic cathedral, or an austere Connecticut church, or you might not be under a full moon, in a set of real life Iron Age standing stones, but but by gum, it can happen. it's simply not guaranteed.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing, it's never going to be boring for us because it wasn't it wasn't compulsory for us, I think, is the long and the short of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
At least for most of us. Some people are now second and third generation pagans who are probably going through the motions, just like many second and third generation people of whatever religion. And I don't think it's any great shame to go through the motions now and then, as
Right.
long as you know in your heart that that you truly want to.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing to kind of not feel it one special day and kind of gut it out and let go and let God or gods. But if you're doing that every single celebration, if you're doing that every time you make something kadosh, you set something aside, then it's time to sit down with yourself, I think. But
yeah,
there's a lot of people who get into a new religion, whatever it may be, with hopes that it's going to automatically change them. And I think with a DIY religion, you have to remember exactly how much you're going to have to do yourself. Whereas with something more established, you can slot in more easily into a community. And that's why I love movements like Unitarian Universalism, for example, because it's got the ready-made community aspect of a mainline Christian denomination with the shall we say doctrinal flexibility of
sure.
a master gymnast. And there's something to be said for it, and invented just to the north of me in Massachusetts, of all the places.
Yeah, that's really good. And I wanted to say too that with spiritual practices, because I've seen people and within Christianity say stuff like, "Oh yeah, why?" I'm going to become Christian. I'm going to feel it. I'm going to experience God, and then get discouraged because they're not immediately. Or I've seen people with even meditation practices feel like that, or mindfulness stuff of like, how come I don't seeing a difference? What's happening? But how it actually works with spiritual practices is you just do it. You go through the motions, you go through the practices, you let it flow through your body, and then down the line, eventually you're able to look back on yourself over the last couple of months and realize you have changed. And instead of having this big moment of, oh, today I changed, it's something that's realized later that you have had changed. And I think that's really what religion is. Like, I would define religion or describe religion more as the actions, the rituals, the stuff we do to cultivate our spirituality. And it's something that's so necessary. And I think maybe post-Enlightenment thinking, where truth is all about whatever is factual, rational, and scientific, we approach practices as, I have to believe in this practice fully and understand everything about this practice and then participate in it. And before Enlightenment, I think there was a better understanding of, I'm going to understand what this practice is by participating in it and seeing how it affects my life over time, and then I will understand it. But I can't understand it without participating and practicing it first. And so so I think that's really the benefit of religion, to be able to just practice and do the meditations, do the prayers, do the rituals. And then over time, you realize, oh, wow, I've actually changed. How I am right now is a different person than I was last year because of what I've been doing the last few months.
Yeah. And for me, it's interesting because it was very much in that experimental spirit that I entered into what I consider, the current phase of my paganism. It was, I had found out that, one of the writers that I had been reading was actually not, that just this evil pervert, but, an exceptionally weird pervert with some very good ideas about the Western mystical tradition.
Hmm.
And, whose writing on it basically boils down to you try this stuff and certain things will occur. You cultivate certain things, certain things will manifest. Poison goes where it's welcome. That's from Terry Pratchett. I can't claim that, but honestly, Terry Pratchett's Hogfather. If anyone is feeling weird about celebrating Christmas, maybe you're not a Christian yourself, maybe you're not feeling the spirit very much, check out Hogfather, read the book, listen to the audiobook, watch the adaptation. It's really good.
I never heard of Hogfather.
So the interesting thing about Ankh-Morpork and the Discworld more generally is it's this huge polyglot society with all these different gods and religions, and actually more gods than there are temples, where you've got priests and priestesses who are basically working a bunch of gods in their little house just so that people who worship, say, Anoia, the goddess of things that get stuck in drawers, have some place to go.
Mm-hmm.
But they all celebrate Hogswatch, and they all leave out a little sherry and pork pie for the Hogfather, and they all get together and enjoy this. And throughout the book, you sort of find the true meaning of Hogswatch, and it's really it's a beautiful reflection of what Christmas could be, I think, if if we all got a little bit less grabby about it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
If you take my meaning.
Yeah.
And it's such a lovely story. I love Discworld no end. And through it, I've had so many amazing revelations of how things could be, and I think their vision of how you deal with a rapidly modernizing world with just a ton of different religions is pretty sound. Although I'm still firm in my belief that there will never be a ruler as insightful and incorruptible as Vetinari. There will never be a cop as good as Vimes, etc. But that's why it's fantasy. That's the fantasy element.
Yeah, and I feel like Christianity and looking at the history and looking at its meetings with pagan cultures and adopting different traditions and combining traditions with Christianity, like Christianity at its best and its best self, when it's participating in its best self, is able to go to pagan cultures and learn how they celebrate these seasons throughout the year and find ways that we already are on the same page. And when they're bringing Christ to a new place, instead of saying you need to stop believing in everything you're believing and believe in everything we believe, instead they say, how do you see the universe? How do you see the meaning of life? And say, okay, we see that too, but in this framing. Isn't it great? Now let's celebrate together. And Christianity at its worst, like I said, just says you need to stop believing in that and believe in what we believe in. Like, I remember recently reading, I forget where it was, but in majority pagan cities, they would go to that town, and one of the things they would do was find the large tree that the pagans worshipped at and build a large church right next to it so that they can convince the people to leave the tree and go into the church. Like, that's just so ridiculous. And like we said at the beginning, when we're able to like overcome our edginess and our exclusiveness and see things on a deeper level, we read those stories and be like, well, the Christians just look silly like doing that. And yeah, so it's like I'm wanting to integrate more of that mindset. But I also wanted to ask you,
Mm-hmm.
if from your knowledge of the different traditions that you know for sure exclusively came from paganism initially, of the ones you know?
Of the ones I know,
Of the ones you know, of the traditions you know that came exclusively from paganism that got co-opted into a Christian celebration of the Jesus birth.
okay. Well, there's the time of year,
Okay.
which has, of course, Saturnalia, the worship of Saturn, the role reversal, the gift giving. I love the idea of gift giving in the social animist sense, because you give somebody the right gift and you're basically, if it meets a need for them, then you're literally making them more free than they were a minute ago when they didn't have that thing. If I
Yeah.
need
That's wait, hold on. That is such a healthier understanding of gift giving than in our consumerist framing of it.
well, one does one's best. I'm not going to say that there's not that little golden glow of acquisitiveness either.
Yeah,
I'm not entirely free of that.
yeah.
It's, but yeah, you give the right gift, and you're increasing their net freedom. But to get back to the pagan stuff, the whole business about a seasonal king of a king for the winter solstice, where you might be sacrificed at the end, or you might just be dumped in a field with your trousers down at the end of 12th night. But basically, so that got introduced as what you call a Lord of Misrule. So on 12th night, you would have this wild party, and everybody would. So this is the Feast of the Epiphany we're talking about, January 6th, and so there would be somebody chosen by lottery, sometimes with a special cake. You might have various things inside there, but one of the things you got was a bean, and whoever got the bean might, depending on the tradition, they might be king for a day. They might be the Lord of Misrule. In England, you also have boy bishops. So that in this same sort of Saturnalian tradition, one of the choir boys would, be dressed in a little miniature bishop's outfit, and he would lead Christmas service or Epiphany service, or one of them, I forget. But so that's got their roots in Saturnalia. We've got.
Hold on. Do you know about Rosca de Reyes, the Mexican Christmas tradition?
I did not.
Where I think it's a fruit cake, some sort of cake that we eat together on January 6th on Epiphany, because that's in the Christian tradition. It's Christmas, 12 days later, Epiphany, celebrating when the Magi came to visit. And Rosca de Reyes, for some reason, some traditions refer to the Magi as the kings, three kings, even though they weren't kings. But I don't really know how that happened. That's not biblical. But so Rosca de Reyes is like the ring of the kings, and so
like cake in New Orleans.
Yeah, I think so. But I know in Latin American countries, and I'm sure it's other places too, they will bake a little baby Jesus figure within the cake, and then you serve the cake, and whoever finds the cake has to make tamales next year. So that's
exactly the same as a New Orleans king cake. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. King cake. Yeah, that would be king cake. But yeah, but I didn't know that Saturnalia practiced that as well. That's interesting.
So in England, in later years, instead of Lord of Misrule, you would have several little things. So this is like 18th, 19th century. You would have a coin, a ring, a button, and a thimble. And so if you got the coin, it meant you would find your fortune in the new year. If you got the ring, you were getting married in the new year. If you got the button, you were going to be a bachelor for the new year. And if you got the thimble, you were going to be an old maid. But that's your Victorians for you, I guess. But the other thing, I got this from the Tudor Monastery Farm Christmas episode. They go into a lot of the old traditions from before Christmas trees were very popular. They've always been a thing in Germany, but the English-speaking world didn't really get into them until Queen Victoria had one, and the Times published this big, beautiful line drawing of, her and Albert and the family gathered around this beautiful German-style tree with the very layered branches. And, everybody had to have one after that, of course. But in the old days, you would decorate with holly and ivy. And the symbolism there, is very much the same thing that stays green throughout all the year. And when you were living on the monastery, you could take anything below a certain diameter. If the tree was above a certain diameter, it was considered timber, and therefore the lord of the manor had to give you permission. But anything below a certain diameter was wood, and you could just gather it. So you would gather your holly and your ivy, and I don't know how this developed, but apparently the holly was very masculine, and the ivy was considered very feminine. And so if you were if you decorated with more holly than ivy, then it meant that the man of the house was in charge, and if the opposite was true, if you had more ivy than holly, then the household was run by the wife. But that's one of those silly old things that doesn't seem to really have much. But the pagans these days have clung on to the idea of the oak king and the holly king, these two identities of the green man, the forest spirit, and that they battle each other, and that the solstice is when so as the sun gets weaker and weaker, the holly king gets more and more dominion, and then at solstice time, the holly king is triumphant for the time being, but the oak king, the summer incarnation of the green man, starts to gain his strength as well. And I'm honestly not sure how far back that one goes, but it's a nice story. There's a lot of pagan traces in old carols too. The holly and the ivy, when they are both full grown, of all the trees that are in the wood, the holly bears the crown. That's an interesting bit of Celtic tree lore in a Christian carol. Oh, the rising of the sun and the running of the deer. And then it walks a priest, so everybody starts singing, the playing of the merry organ, sweet singing in the choir. That's what it's about. We promise. It's like half the verse is so pagan, and then somebody walks in. I can't help but imagine that. Gosh. You've also got this tradition of costuming and going door to door. That seems to be extremely old. So they call it mumming. In Ireland, they'll in certain rural parts, they'll make costumes out of just twisted braided straw, and they'll mask themselves. In some places, in some places they'll darken their faces. But that tradition's on the outs for very obvious reasons. But masking, cross-dressing, doing these little plays in people's kitchens, invading people's houses, and doing traditional song and dance in return for money and booze. Sometimes for dinner, or just for treats if it's kids. And of course, that became our Christmas caroling. And there's some great coverage of that in Ehrenreich's book, Dancing in the Streets, as well. Gosh.
It's funny. It reminds me too of the Also, in the Latin American celebration of Christmas is Posadas, which is, and I haven't celebrated this. My Mexican friends told me about this, that they would go house to house together to family members and open the door. And Posadas is Spanish for the inns, and so it would be like Mary and Joseph going to different places trying to find a place to have Jesus, and they would go house to house, and they would like kind of act out, can we stay here? And they have to say no, there's no room here. And then I think they would sing a song. And so it's funny, it's like all these different ways that it's all intertwined, and there's like a variety of meanings you can attach to this. But no matter what, somehow it's like, that's what I'm thinking too, of like, no matter what, the acting out of these traditions and practices is necessary within our journeys. And but no matter what, no matter how it comes out, there will be different meaning attached to it, but it still will be practice.
Yeah. And so much about this stuff is just about gathering together as a community and surviving in the lean times.
Mm-hmm.
In the Germanic paganism of the Norse lands, there's this idea called the wild hunt, where you have Odin or Wotan riding through the sky during the dark times, and he would have all his huntsmen and all these dead warriors with him. And so you've got to be off the road and safe by the fire. So a great deal of that, you know, a great deal of that tradition, I think, comes from personifying just the dangers of winter, be it being trapped outside during a sudden storm, or simply just freezing to death and starving to death in isolated conditions. And who would be the first to go in those situations? It would be your travelers, your charcoal burners, your anybody who's out in the marginal bits. So you bring them in to help the community survive.
And it makes sense why a tradition of gift giving would arise during the winter season, because there are people out there who need more during the winter season. They need more blankets, more clothes, more food. It makes sense why it would arise for the winter.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
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 There's all sorts of weird connections. One thing that is very Christian but is interesting to me is, as an herbalist, I love reading these old herbal and medicines from monks and nuns of days gone by. And one of the most interesting things is Saint Hildegard of Bingen. So classical music nerds know her as one of the first credited composers of Western liturgical music, but she also had this recipe that roughly translates to cookies of joy, and so they're basically sugar cookies with cinnamon and cloves added. And what's the taste of Christmas in across most of the Anglosphere? It's those same warm spices of cinnamon, cloves, allspice, and ginger, and what have you. Anything that's got that bit of richness. But Hildegard held those spices in high regard to ward off basically depression. So it's interesting that winter, this gloomy, dark, cold, wet season, when people are basically having seasonal affective disorder, you have these spices make an appearance, not just for their taste perhaps, but quite possibly as a way to drive back the blues, as Hildegard was saying. But it's hard to tell definitively. A lot of these traditions, a lot of people think that Christmas trees as we know them are fully pagan. But the thing with them is, as you were saying, when Christianity was spreading, the pagans of the time were worshiping in sacred groves. And one of them in, I forget what part of Europe it was, but it was, I believe, in some part of Germany, there was an oak that was to Donner, basically a continental version of Thor. So Donner's oak was cut down, and the saint who did that told the people of, I guess, Saxony or wherever, that instead of worshiping Donner's oak for Thor, you're going to use an evergreen tree to worship Christ. So that became the German Christmas tree, and now that might very well be covering up some even deeper pagan connection, of course. But if it is, I haven't seen it.
Yeah. I also know that I recently was reading about this, that there was a celebration on December 24th, the feast day of Adam and Eve, which is largely no longer celebrated. But when it was, they would do plays on that day of the story of Adam and Eve and the serpent, which had the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. And they would usually end the play by talking about Jesus, like Jesus is undoing what Adam did in this play that we just showed you, and show off the tree of life, like through Jesus we're getting the tree of life that Adam couldn't get. And so that they were using the tree in their plays that would take place on December 24th. So some people think that might have been a connection through that. But yeah, nobody really knows exactly how. Yeah.
Well, that's another, those liturgical dramas are also touched on in Ehrenreich's book as, this sort of middle ground between accepting and rejecting that big aesthetic punch that you get from the big Dionysian type celebrations, and much more restrained puritanical type worship. You would have each guild in a medieval town might put on a different biblical scene on a cart, basically like a parade float. So a guild of boat builders might do Noah and his ark, or the carpenters would do something about Saint Joseph and the young Jesus.
Wow,
that sort of a thing.
That's cool.
Yeah, no, and there's a similar bunch of masking and that sort of thing in the British Isles as well. You have the mumming. They don't usually tell biblical stories though. With mummers, it's typically the lives of, in England it'll be St. George, in Ireland it'll be St. Patrick. But these are generally put on by the laity for the laity, whereas the medieval stuff was with the blessing of the church, and sometimes would have the priest involved or blessing the proceedings, what have you. Yeah.
That's good.
No, it's very. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say I've also come to very much value that aesthetic punch, as you called it, especially because I grew up in a evangelical church where there wasn't as much aesthetics, and so now, and then when I got older and started exploring other types of churches that had more art and aesthetics and liturgy, I like loved it so much. And also with the knowledge that the people that I would meet that grew up in those churches didn't see the big deal as much as I did because they grew up around it. But I like, yeah, have come to very much value it because I grew up a little bit lacking in it. And I was thinking too, like this season, because in the same way, it's like we talk about the pagan holidays that coincide with the seasons. There is that within the Christian tradition too, which also doesn't get as talked about within evangelicalism, which is it's like the year starts with Advent, which the 4 weeks before Christmas, and then Christmas, 12 days, Epiphany, season of Epiphany until Lent, and then the season of Lent until Easter, and then a few weeks later Pentecost, and then you have ordinary time or time after Pentecost until Advent again. So that's the church liturgical year that doesn't get talked about in evangelical churches. It will be talked about in Catholic and mainline churches. And I have also, because I didn't grow up with that, now in my Christian spiritual life, I very much try to somehow honor those seasons when they come, and in some sort of way. And that's been really great too. And kind of like how we were saying earlier with spiritual practices, how you have to actually do them to feel the difference. I've also grew up not really caring that much about Christmas. It was just like, and because I purely took it for granted. And so, I mean, as a little kid, I loved it because of gifts and stuff. But then as I got older, as a teenager, I was like a kind of a hipster, anti-mainstream, annoying kid. I was like, oh yeah, Christmas, whatever, same thing every year, predictable. And then now, and that's kind of stuck with me, that attitude, even as an adult. But then this year, I knew I wanted to do this series where I talk way more about a radical reading of Christmas and do way more streams and talking about Christmas, talking about Advent, wear this hat every time I get on a video and stream. And because of I've been doing that, I now am really excited about Christmas. And the same way that we're talking about how if you just do the spiritual practices, if you just do it with your body and with your actions and your words, it then arises within your heart in a way that I haven't experienced within my heart of Christmas and most Christmases of my life, probably because I've intentionally chosen to be all about Christmas through my actions and words. Now I'm like really am at a heart level excited about Christmas this Christmas season.
Well, that's awesome. I couldn't be happier for you, dude. And I think that I feel you very deeply because I haven't had much time so far this month to really get into it. And recently my workplace got decorated. I was away at the time, and suddenly, bam, I'm suddenly looking around like, oh gosh, can I make a gluten-free plum pudding? I've never had plum pudding. My partner's gluten-free, but by gum, I would like to try that.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I love about Christmas is, how it's sort of started to accrete these secular traditions as well. Like you've got A Christmas Carol, which makes, it makes pretty frequent mention of, the fact that Christmas is a religious thing. But, Dickens did us a big service as far as, giving, non-believers of all descriptions another way to sort of latch on to the Christmas season and to get into it. I think that, Scrooge's Reformation can be read in a bunch of different ethical contexts.
Mm-hmm.
He's not just trying to, at first he's just trying to escape, a very thinly secularized version of hell. And by the end of it, he's become a better person in anybody's book. I don't care who you are. And, I think that, can I get really controversial for 2 seconds here?
Yeah, for sure.
There will never, ever be a better Scrooge than Michael Caine in the Muppet Christmas Carol.
I don't think I've seen that
on this one.
I don't think I've seen that one.
Oh,
Oh no.
okay. All right. Two things. Gluten-free plum pudding and then no, yeah. Do yourself a favor, watch The Muppet Christmas Carol, because first of all, it's one of the most faithful to the source material that of all the screen adaptations you'll ever see. Second of all, Muppets. Third of all, amazing music. I know that people hate that one song, but you know what? It goes on a bit too long, but you can skip it in the American version. You'll know it if you hear it, but you know, everybody gets a mulligan, right? And then finally, you have Michael Caine, and there's this thing going around on Facebook. I haven't tried to verify it at all, but it's such a good story that I'll tell you anyway. Apparently, Michael Caine talked to Brian Henson and said that he was going to play this as if he was doing it with the Royal Shakespeare Company. He wasn't going to do anything Muppety. He wasn't going to wink and nod the way that some of the Muppet characters do. He wasn't going to, you know, make any reference to the fact that he was acting alongside puppets. He was just going to play it like, you know, he was with the greatest actors of his age. Mm-hmm. And Brian Henson said to him, "Bang on, perfect." And that is his performance. That is what I grew up with. I still have a scar on my hand. There's a little dot right on. I never remember if that's the mount of Venus or the mount of the moon. Can any palmists out there? Anyway, but what happened was, Marley's ghost appeared. I'm not going to give away. That one, but the appearance of Marley's ghost. I was so shocked that I was holding a pencil in a really silly way. There's still a bit of pencil lead in there from when I was like 5.
Oh, I have like a mark like that on my leg from pencil lead. Yeah.
I always used to worry about it until I learned what graphite was.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. The Muppet Christmas Carol to me encapsulates the Dickensian spirit of Christmas. And I love the Dickensian thing, not just for its aesthetics, again, and a marvelous aesthetic punch to get you in the mood, but just its sort of universal ethical appeal of, you know, don't be stingy, and you know, and get out there and live life, and you know, and it's not just money neither. You can be stingy with your efforts with other people. Everything, you know, anything you do. I mean, money is just a symbol for work anyway. It's just you know, concentrated potential labor. We have so much. And it's really a shame. It's a shame to not share it. The idea isn't so much that Marley was a sinner per se. They don't put it in those terms as much, but Marley's ghost says, "It's required of every man that he that the spirit within him should go forth." And I wish I could quote it for real, but just the idea that you're not just on Earth to believe a certain way or to have a certain job or to you know, just to attend to what you think of as your business, but to really consider what your business is.
Yeah. And it's funny you brought up
my business. The common welfare was my business. The doings of my trade were but a drop in the comparative ocean of my business.
Yeah.
And the tragedy of Marley is that he only realizes this after death.
Yeah.
And there's this whole beautiful scene that sadly, doesn't show up in the Muppet version either, but where Ebenezer looks out as Marley's ghost departs, and he sees all these spirits just wandering around, and they're all wearing chains that they forged in life, and they're all suffering because they watch people day in and day out, and they fly across the globe, and they see all this human suffering, and they're now unable to do anything about it forevermore. And, as an activist, that's the biggest tragedy I can imagine. And Dickens, for all his faults, he understood that. And it's so I think he did a really big service as far as giving us another way to view this season. He really reinvented Christmas time.
Yeah.
And yeah, I will go to the mat. Michael Caine he shows every step of that transformation of Ebenezer Scrooge. And I was really lucky to grow up with that performance. I recommend you check that out and maybe do a review of it. I don't know, might be fun.
Actually, well, what's funny that you brought up Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, because I was planning on putting together a video for hopefully next week about the Carol, Charles Dickens' The Carol philosophy that he dedicated his life to and started with writing that book. And I feel like there can be a dangerous apolitical centrism that can come from a version of a Carol philosophy that what is one of the reasons that people don't like Christmas and dread when Christmas comes, because people talk about how it feels fake, how people are talking about like, oh yeah, peace on earth, joy to the world. We all love each other. We're all giving each other gifts. But then once the day's over, back to the discrimination, back to the inequality, stuff like that. And I get that. And so I feel like, and I've said this in other videos in different ways, that the message that we are all one, that we all must love one another, and all that can be co-opted to just get people to move to inaction and be told, well, everything's fine because we're all one, we're all equal. But what that message should do is move us to action, to actualize it in reality, in our material reality. And
absolutely, yeah.
So I think that perhaps is the good version of Carol philosophy that gets us to move into action and enact it all year round, instead of just, oh, isn't it great, we all love each other, we're all equal, it's all good.
Yeah
Well,
and to be fair, I think that you can have that in paganism too. There's any number of celebrations where you might be ripping it up around the bonfire in the woods, and you really want to get back in connection with nature and the spirits, and you're having a great time and you're feeling so good, and then you wake up and you go to work the next day and you feel very disconnected from it. And it's easy to put a spiritual gloss over hedonism, and it's easy to confuse the aesthetic punch, be it a bonfire and folk songs, or a cathedral and hymns. It's easy to confuse the aesthetics and the real spiritual power. And it's easy because those holy things are apart from our usual experience and our usual way, that that distance can also feel like, can also make it harder to bridge the gap between the lessons of Christmas and the day-to-day realities that we face. But yeah, I feel it's very easy to get into the sort of fakery, and to be alienated by it is absolutely natural. I blame nobody. I mean, certain pop Christmas songs, does anybody like? Like, there are a few that really get on my nerves. But then again, there are some that have hidden depths. Can I make a terrible admission?
Yeah.
I get inordinately misty. The Phantom Prep cook comes and starts chopping onions when I hear Little Drummer Boy. As a musician, the idea of, well, I've got nothing but my music. Let's I know what this newborn needs: an epic drum solo. But real talk, it's it always, the idea that the Roman gods need an entire oxen, and maidens strewing flowers, and gongs and drums, and big processions and everything. All Jesus needs is an epic drum solo. And
if that's all Jesus needs, that's all I need too.
Yeah. And but the idea that somebody with nothing but their creativity, good enough, and good enough for anybody who matters, really. That's a really powerful feeling, and I know what it's like to want that kind of assurance.
Yeah.
And then after that, on the Christmas pop station, you go from that, and you got to imagine me in the passenger seat, just sniffling softly to myself, and then something like Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer comes on, and I'm just like, oh, because it's like all these different aesthetics, sort of the campy family fun, and the religious stuff, and the pagan stuff, and the Christian stuff, and the commercial stuff, all gets whizzed together into this really terrible milkshake. And it's like you were saying before, I think the point of deconstructing Christmas is to take the bits we really like, and give them, and it's like you're building something better out of existing bricks.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's my mother's toffee, and Russian tea cakes, and the Muppet Christmas Carol, and my brother's eggnog. Definitely caroling. My folks used to host a caroling party way back when, and then I bring in the pagan elements. So I would I'll have pagan symbols on the tree. I'll have a solstice fire with my friends. We'll do some chanting, some drumming, what have you, and then a few days later, it's off to Christmas breakfast with my family, and it's a lovely thing. And I think that the modern world, as well as as well as the the worlds of the past, we don't quite know what to do with it, because there's all these sort of commercial accretions, like layers of coral or layers of rust, and you get down beyond that, though, and there's real potential for people to turn their lives around with the turning seasons. And another Roman festival around this time is Sol Invictus. At the solstice, you have the idea of the unconquered sun. So at the solstice, the days start getting longer and start building towards springtime. Up here in the northern hemisphere, anyway. In the southern hemisphere, it's completely reversed, which is why Australians and New Zealanders have the option of going to the beach for Christmas, as well as all our friends down in South America and below the equator in Africa. And I forget where I was going with this. I'm sorry.
Sol Invictus.
Been that kind of a day. Yes, Sol Invictus. There's a so I think as part of that tradition coming down, there's not much left to it, but I love this idea that Christmas and New Year's, you take stock of the year and you think about the things you want to change. And of course, the thing about New Year's resolutions is that everybody's like, oh, we're not going to keep them, da 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 da. But that's, I think, part of the reason for that is they don't have the spiritual power behind them that say something based on the solstice, or based on Epiphany, or based on something less arbitrary than the new year. So, I might think to myself, instead of a New Year's resolution, maybe a Sol Invictus resolution, that before the sun gets to the next solstice, before the spring equinox, before the next cross quarter day, I want to do this, that, or the other. I want to do one selfless thing a day, or inconvenience myself for the sake of another person for at least once a day, just to show that I can, just to show that I'm not some mewling toddler. Or it could be anything. That's just something I've been thinking about personally.
Yeah.
The lovely thing about all this is that you can frame it however you want, and it's going to work for you if you put the effort in.
Yeah.
And hopefully, all other things being equal, if you put the effort in, you see a result. And the calendar year is just kind of arbitrary. It just kind of got there. Whereas these seasonal observations and these festivals of life and family and all this great stuff, they're what last. They're what make the impression.
Yeah.
And just like we'd be silly not to use them for our own personal improvement, we would be silly not to leverage them for the revolution too. There's a sort of stereotype that leftists want to do away with Christmas because something oppression something, and nothing could be further from the truth. I think that Christmas in many ways prefigures a post-scarcity society, feasting and drinking and having fun with people. prefigures the selflessness of a post-scarcity society in a very pale way, and a lot of times with the gift giving, especially if it's something like an office Secret Santa, where you're maybe not in as much control over it as you might like to be. But I think that the best traditions of this time of year have something of the past and also something of the future in them, in that way of thinking. There's something that's ancient and it's from time immemorial, but it's also got the promise of this better day in it as well. And while we can talk about how evil the corporate side of Christmas is until the cows come home, and frankly, there's a petulant teenager in me that would love to do that, but also just part of the whole catching flies with honey. People are going to celebrate it anyway. We might as well talk about the people that can't afford to celebrate it in great style. We might as well talk about the systems that put them in that situation. And we might as well talk about how, our well-intentioned seasonal charity is simply not enough. And those are tough questions. Those are tough conversations to broach rather. I hope my last little video before the walkout is helpful for people, how to bring the revolution home for the holidays. But it's got a few suggestions. Of course, some of us don't have great places to go to. Some of us are not going to be listened to by our relatives, whatever we say, even if we say all the right things. And that video is not going to be as helpful for those folks. And but for those of us with someplace nice to go, or with people in our families who will listen, I think that it's a wonderful time to talk to people. And you don't have to have a hard conversation about it either. I think that the spirit of the season in many ways is the spirit of of the future that we want to see.
Yeah.
And frankly,
I like that.
It's there's a prefigurative element that we haven't jumped on as much as we want. And what I would really love in the future is for the reactionaries to suddenly start campaigning against Christmas themselves, because the leftists have taken it over. If that ever happens, we've won. It's a matter of time. It's the return of the repressed is working for us in many ways, and I think that the right wing has an edge on us as far as co-opting traditions and using that the nostalgia about tradition to fuel their agenda. And I think we owe it to ourselves not just to celebrate and to reach out to other people and draw the community close, but also to say to them, hey, doesn't this feel good? Mm-hmm. Doesn't this feel amazing? you know, we could be this caring for one another all year round. We could, you know, we wouldn't have to have a Christmas tree up, but, you know, we wouldn't have to wear funny hats, but we could, if we wanted to, really embrace this. And that's, again, all the alienation about Christmas is an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because there's so many of us who are disappointed in that same way of like, oh, this is fake, it's all corporate, you know, we're supposed to be happy, but really, you know, we're just working we're working the same jobs, and it's, you know, the same crappy pay, the same everything, but we're supposed to be happy about it. And, you know, that's the value, I think, of learning the old pagan derived traditions and the old neglected Christian traditions as well, because so much of it is about, you know, it's about engendering that feeling of community and getting people to embrace one another authentically and recognize, you know, your need for me and my need for you. And it goes so thoroughly against our atomized capitalist world that they don't know where to have it. And so, you know, they capitalize on the aspects that can be capitalized on and leave the rest to rot. Yeah. And so it's up to us to sing the carols. It's up to us to dance around the bonfires and to bring the real joy back, to cultivate the joy, because it's not there automatically. Yeah. But just because it's not there automatically doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah.
You have to make that decision, and it's a very witchy decision in a way, because you say, I want to feel a certain way. I want to recapture that joy of being a kid. I want to feel that sense of anticipation and excitement, or I want to, you know, be happy about the snow and not just see it as an impediment on the way to work. I want to sing the carols and really mean them. And then you go about finding the things, like, be it the Muppet Christmas Carol or the toffee or the right song at the right time, and you go through the process to give yourself that aesthetic punch, to get yourself to a spiritual or an ethical place that you want to be. And we can't count on the powers that be to give it to us, because, you know, if our needs were really met, we would be a lot freer to do things that they don't approve of.
Yeah.
And so we've got to do it for one another. And there's wonderful things all around, everything from neighborhood cookie swaps, like my partner and I did just this afternoon, to all kinds of community events. And I think that if I could wish anything for the folks viewing us, and for, you know, just people in general, I wish everybody the very best of luck and skill in building traditions and cultivating that spiritual and aesthetic sense. Whatever you need for this season, whether that's a personal change like Ebenezer Scrooge, whether that's you know, a religious journey like the Magi, whether that's, you know, a slow building of strength, like the sun coming back from the south, back into the long days of the spring. Because that's another need.
Mm-hmm.
And when your needs are fulfilled, suddenly you're free.
Yeah. It's all there. This season really is radical. We know it. We're trying to get everyone else to open their eyes to it too. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry if I monologued a little too much there. That was
good. That was good. Thank you for sharing that with us. Also, I forgot you got a uke there, don't you?
I've got a little mandolin here.
A mandolin. Oh yeah, a mandolin.
Yeah. So one of the oh dear. Excuse me while I.
Yeah. Would you be able to play something for us to close us out?
Absolutely.
Okay, hold on. Before you do that, I'm gonna read something, and then you can play us a song, and that'll be the end. I want to read the lyrics to the Dar Williams song, "The Christians and the Pagans," because you shared that with me. You're the one, and I've actually read this like twice already on my Twitch stream, and so I want to read. I knew I wanted to read this at the end. Oh, mispronounced. Thanks for me. So I'm gonna read this, and then you're gonna do a song for us, and we'll close out.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. All right. This is Dar Williams, "The Christians and the Pagans," a song. You can look it up on YouTube after this. I just love reading it too, because it feels like great to just read it. Says, Amber called her uncle, said, "We're up here for the holiday. Jane and I were having solstice. Now we need a place to stay." And her Christ-loving uncle watched his wife hang Mary on a tree. He watched his son hang candy canes, all made with the red dye number 3. He told his niece, "It's Christmas Eve. I know our life is not your style." She said, "Christmas is like solstice, and we miss you, and it's been a while." So the Christians and the pagans sat together at the table, finding faith and common ground the best that they were able. And just before the meal was served, hands were held and prayers were said, sending hope for peace on earth to all their gods and goddesses. The food was great, the tree plugged in. The meal had gone without a hitch, till Timmy turned to Amber and said, "Is it true that you're a witch?" His mom jumped up and said, "The pies are burning." She hit the kitchen, and it was Jane who spoke. She said, "It's true, your cousin's not a Christian. But we love trees, we love the snow, the friends we have, the world we share. And you find magic from your God, and we find magic everywhere." So the Christians and the pagans sat together at the table, finding faith and common ground the best that they were able. And where does magic come from? I think magic's in the learning, because now when Christians sit with pagans, only pumpkin pies are burning. When Amber tried to do the dishes, her aunt said, "Really, no, don't bother." Amber's uncle saw how Amber looked like Tim and like her father. He thought about his brother, how they hadn't spoken in a year. He thought he'd call him up and say, "It's Christmas and your daughter's here." He thought of fathers, sons, and brothers, saw his own son tug his sleeve, saying, "Can I be pagan?" Dad said, "We'll discuss it when they leave." So the Christians and the pagans sat together at the table, finding faith and common ground the best that they were able, lighting trees and darkness, learning new ways from the old, and making sense of history and drawing warmth out of the cold. It's good stuff right there.
I love that song. Dar Williams is an amazing songwriter. I was very lucky to see her live at the Falcon Ridge Folk Festival a couple of times. And
awesome.
Highly recommend her work.
All right, play us out, Mystic.
It's about my favorite carol, I think. The boar's hand in hand bear I be decked with bay and rosemary. So I pray my master's Marie be modestus in convivio. Caput aperi de ferro, redens laudes domino. Caput aperi de ferro, redens laudes domino. The boar's head, as I understand, is the rarest dish in all this land. Which thus be decked with a gay garland, let us servire cantico. Tappery Deferro, Redden's loudest domino. Tappery Deferro, Redden's loudest domino. Our steward hath provided this in honor of the King of Bliss, which on this day to be served is in regnancy Capodabri Deferro, Redden's loudest domino. Capodabri Deferro, Redden's loudest domino. For the non-Latin students out there, that's the boar's head I bring, giving praise to God.
That's good. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Hey, everybody.
Of course. Yes. Merry Christmas, everybody. Happy holidays.
And a beautiful solstice.
A beautiful solstice.
All the world.
Thank you. Everyone go check out Mystic Muttering and the link and follow me if you haven't already. And I'll see y'all later. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.